Welcome to Rekindle XM, where we help people recognize and recover from long-term stress and burnout. As we all know, life has a way of catching us up into whirlwinds we don't see coming. For many people, life is going smoothly, our careers are going great, and then something happens. Whether it's a tragedy or an unexpected event, things can quickly happen that will throw us off our game. Well, today we want to welcome a very special guest, A Hart, and he's going to share his story of burnout and recovery with us. Oftentimes we associate burnout with our careers and our professions, but that's not the case for Stephen. So stay tuned as we dive into his story. So thank you so much for joining us, Stephen. You are an amazing person. I am grateful to have had the chance to meet you. You are the founder of Isles Media, host of the top-rated I Am Black Success podcast, and a coach on a mission to help working professionals create their magnetic personal brand with more visibility, opportunities, and income streams. As a participant in one of your recent challenges, I can absolutely attest to that. You're an amazing coach. You're also a sought-after podcast producer, content marketing leader. You've created and produced several corporate podcasts, so you're way more experienced than us. So you've been featured multiple places. So Apple Podcast, Forbes, LinkedIn, Black Enterprise, Speakers Magazine, SpeakerCon, Thrive Global, and that's just some of them. You're also an alumni of LinkedIn's first Creator Accelerator program. And as a participant in your recent course, I can absolutely see that. And beyond that, you are a proud husband to your wife, Kristen, and together they are proud parents of 2 crumb snatchers. And just on a note, I just saw that one of your crumb snatchers just got accepted into a STEM program. So I'm sure you are a proud parent about that. So welcome.
Thank you so much for
Welcome,
having
Stephen.
me. It's great to be here, and I'm excited about this conversation.
And we are as well. And we often think of burnout and kind of these stress crisis moments as being caused by our jobs. That's what we hear about. But what many people don't recognize is that there are other stories, and yours is one of those. So we're looking forward to jumping in and helping our listeners also recognize what can happen outside of the job. So we're going to kind of jump in. Stephen, before we jump in, is there anything else you'd like to tell us before we start peppering you with questions?
Michelle, I was listening to you do that intro, and I'm thinking I might need to cut this and have this be the start of my own reel. You did such a great job. I
Well,
think you
thank you.
captured there's so much to a story, to a life story, right? But I think you captured it pretty well.
All right. Well, we're going to jump in then. So, Stephen, I love your story. It's dynamic. There's so many pieces to it. But take us back. So, before we get to this point where you had this crisis in life, what had happened previously in your life, and what was going on in your family, in your career, just life in general?
It's a great question, and I'm going to tell you the story of a burnout crisis that I had that began right before the pandemic started. But if I could take you back prior to that, I would share that my wife, who you just mentioned, Kristen, who's actually walking in the room right now to give me a glass of water.
Awesome.
So, back in we got married, and about 3 weeks after our marriage, I went from having a very successful business in the summer of 2008 that ended up losing several $1 million. And that was a season of life that was extremely challenging, to say the least. Going from having a 7-figure net worth to being 6 figures in debt with a new bride. So the reason that my bio and every talk I will ever share will always start from a place of gratitude to her is primarily because she stuck with me through one of those seasons where I often say she could have just backed out right then and there and said, hey, this is not what I signed up for. But in that season, I made a commitment, a life commitment to myself to never put myself in a place where I was in debt ever again. And so over the past 15 plus years, we'll be married 16 years this summer. We did everything to position ourselves to clear debt, which we did, and to establish a, firm footing for ourselves and for our family, and that we've done. And so coming forward to this burnout crisis, I found myself in December 29th getting a call on a Saturday morning, 4 days before Christmas, that my dad had suffered a stroke back in my home country of Jamaica. Uh,
Wow.
what I didn't realize, Brian and Michelle and Masha, is that was the beginning of
Mm.
a turning point, of a valley season, of a burnout crisis. My dad was running a business of 35 plus years that had run its course, that had needed to kind of make a pivot himself and didn't, and it took a toll on him physically. And so in that transition time, I found myself going home to Jamaica, realizing that this business was in significant debt, that his health was never going to be back to where it would have been. And listen, leading up to that, I felt it coming. We were
Mm.
at a place where I was fighting to help him transition from a service heavy focus to creating a product that would have been a legacy product for a family. Up to a month before, I'd seen him and couldn't pull the last bit of a recipe for a product that I'd wanted. And I had every intent right after Christmas to go secure that and wasn't able to. And so I came,
So,
yeah, go ahead.
oh, so Stephen, I just heard some really interesting things because you're talking about a life-threatening illness that's happening, but you're talking about some other burdens or responsibilities that also went along with that. So you're in the middle of your career, and at that time, I believe, were you already podcasting and fully in your career? I'm assuming life was already busy, and did you had kids at this point? So had family life, work life, your avocation as well. Is that all going on at this time?
I was 2 months shy of our podcast's 4th year anniversary. Up to his stroke, I had published as an independent podcast, I know you'll appreciate this, 205 consecutive episodes being published every Monday morning at 5 a.m. Eastern,
Wow.
which is still a point of pride for me, having been able to do that.
It
And,
should be.
and was in a thriving new career. I'm still with the same employer in cybersecurity. And life was good. The kids were doing great. Everything was good up to that point. It was incredibly busy. I had no margins. And so when this happened, it tapped into what was already a very full page. And I didn't have that margin to handle some of the mental weight and stress that had been placed on me in that season. And I came home, Michelle, from Jamaica after my dad was in hospital for a couple weeks, trying to reestablish him at home, trying to figure this all out. I returned home to my wife saying, hey, I have 2 people that have scheduled appointments for you to go see this week. One is your doctor, and one's a therapist for you to go talk to. And this Jamaican Black man pretty much cussed my wife out and said, woman, I don't need to talk to anybody. Nothing's wrong with me. And thank God she kind of put her foot down and said, nope, go talk to them. It's covered by our insurance. If you find that you don't need it, that's okay. But go have that conversation. What I didn't realize was this was, again, January of 2020. I didn't know what was happening in 60 days. That COVID was going to take over, shut everything down, amplify what was already a very stressful situation with my dad's business, with his finances, with his medical. All those things just took on another level of difficult when the pandemic hit. We were shut down here. My wife is furloughed. She had an injury. Kids are home from school, and that weight just shut me down. And I went through what I often share as just a complete shift in mindset. I couldn't move. I was paralyzed by the weight of it all. Found myself many days just eating all the wrong things, stuck in the couch, can't move. The 205 consecutive weeks went out the door. I'd shut the podcast down thinking it was going to be a month. It turned into 8, and it was difficult. It was a difficult time.
Stephen, you mentioned that at some point you felt your intuition, as I interpret it, felt something coming for something around the corner. Let's step into that a little bit. So here you are, a successful man dealing with problems as they come, literally problem solving your life, your father's life, everybody's life who's you're responsible for as a parent and a provider. You felt something. Can you talk about that a little bit? Was that just a sense of urgency? Was that your intuition ringing the alarm bells that you ignored? Define that a little bit for us.
No, Masha, when I was saying that, I was more so hinting that I felt something coming health-wise for my dad. And up to 2 weeks before his stroke, was sitting in a restaurant in DC with my boss and shared with him that I needed to beat my dad having a stroke or a heart attack and getting this out of him. That's how close I felt this coming. He was under that much stress, and his lifestyle choices, running a catering business, which is a difficult business. Food business is a difficult business to be in, period. And here he was in his 60s, putting this incredible weight on his shoulders, trying to see this business through that at the time had caught up to him. That, he'd never been somebody who was wired to technology. And it was for me, I could see that being a problem for the business, to not embrace social media, to not embrace where things were going, that allowed for some of these other players in the space to start taking his market share. And so I saw the writing on the wall, and had this fight with him up to that summer of 20, said, hey, you have to let go. And an indelible memory of him saying, I'm going down sinking with the ship. I'm going to fight till, my last breath to keep this alive. And so I just felt it. I felt the need to secure what was, at the time, I mentioned it briefly and kind of skirted around it, but my dad is an amazing chef. He's represented Jamaica all over the world. And if not in 2019, it was 2018 that he was recognized by Jamaica's Washington Post equivalent at a food awards, and given like a lifetime achievement award. He was a well-recognized chef of his time, but it caught up to him. And I wanted to capture his rum cake, a traditional Jamaican rum cake. He'd bake this rum cake that 90% of people would do, and it just wouldn't hit. And his version of it was just out of this world. I thought, if we could secure this could be a legacy play. But he was never one to go by the book and write a traditional recipe and have it. So I was pushing against that natural, I'll just do this based on eye and feel. Like, let's have something
I,
that we could pass off to your grandkids and theirs. And we never secured it, unfortunately. And that also played
um,
into what was a mental trigger for me. My dad's grateful and blessed that he's still here some 4 years later. But I'll be honest, if I don't tell you that parts a part of him, while he's still alive, there are many parts of this that I feel like passed in that moment. That opportunity passed in that moment. He's a new normal, suffered from dementia. There's several things that impacted him in that first and following a second stroke in this room at the beginning of 2020. And it's a difficult, as a caretaker, to navigate these transition points while still trying to help your parent see that it's not over and there's still opportunity for life to be lived. And at the same time, make sure that in those seasons, you're taking care of yourself, because that was a burnout crisis moment, but I've had two since. And I talked about the argument I had with my wife and telling her about herself. Had I not had therapy, Masha, I would not be here in this capacity right now, 4 years later, of sound mind, because therapy helped me to navigate so many of these valley moments to this time that we're in right now, to equip me with the tools and ability to navigate panic attacks and anxiety, depression, and all the things that came along in this stretch.
yes, and therapy is something that is still being frowned upon, but it is such an important element. When your brain is hurting, you go to the brain doctor. When your heart is hurting, you go to cardiologist.
Mhm.
Anything else is hurting, you go to that doctor. But when we have something happening with our cognitive health, we try and tend to hide it from the world because of shame and other negative feelings that are associated with that. Suddenly, if I see a therapist, I'm less of a person, but that's not true at all. So, applause to you and your wife for making this journey and a marriage safe.
And it's interesting, Stephen, how there is often some intuition, but usually it's not for ourselves. Like, it's interesting how you noticed and you kind of saw some of these signs leading up for your dad, and you recognized that this was a high stress career and that there were probably some steps that he should take at a given point. And then it's interesting how your wife saw that in you and said, hey, you're getting help, and thank goodness. It sounds like she was very persuasive in getting you to get the help that you needed.
That I didn't know I
Um,
needed. I did
yeah,
not
and
know I needed.
it's super interesting because a lot of times we see it in our loved ones, but not in ourselves. So. Brian and I, we suffered professional burnout, so very different story, and Masha's gone through it as well. But it's interesting if you will ask this, in my case, Brian and I, about the other person, we could see it so clearly, but we didn't see it in ourselves necessarily. So that's actually a really important point. And for those out there who have amazing spouses and amazing family members, listen to them when they see this, because they often do before we see it.
So I said, Michelle, that
Yeah.
I've had a couple other instances of that following. And November, not of this past year, but of 2022, I'd hit this burnout place in professionally. And in the space of 48 hours, I jumped on a Zoom call. And usually with my therapist, and usually there's small talk for the first 5 minutes.
Mhm.
And my camera came on, and she essentially said, "What the heck is going on?" She just took one look at me. I got on a call that same day with one of my executive leaders. He threatened to have me ship my laptop to him. And that same night, Kristen walks up right here and she says, "I'm going to say something that you're not going to like, but you don't look good and you need to shut it down." And talking about that professional burnout, right? Just everyone else around you sees it all over you, but you can't see the picture you're in.
Yeah, you kind of brought that up with your dad's story and your own story now, that when you start feeling a level of success, you don't really recognize how much stress that's putting on you. And then it just builds up. It really does take other people to try to intervene, especially if you're feeling like you're doing everything that you need to do and it's starting to work and you don't want to give that up. So, but kind of going back to, were you in 2020 when you were saying you were sitting on the couch for 8 months, basically? How did you start pulling out of that?
I am a person who sets goals, and it's something I teach in courseware of mine, having a clear North Star, having sort of these, like Jim Collins in the book Good to Great talked about BHAGs, big, hairy, audacious goals. I had created my Big 10 hairy, audacious goals back when I started, shortly after I started a podcast in June of 2010. I can't remember exactly when, Brian, but I know I was sitting on the couch watching Netflix with a bucket of ice cream and, thinking in that moment of paralysis, is that North Stars, are these big BHAGs still important to you? And they were. They were still very important to me, but it wasn't a flip of a switch to be able to re-engage, to get up off that couch mentally, not even physically, but mentally get up off that couch. And I'm sure you've heard people say to you in your valley season, but many of you watching or listening, you've heard someone who cares say, Michelle, just take it one day at a time. Just take it one day at a time. And for me, one day at a time was paralyzing. One day was weight I couldn't bear on my shoulders. In some days, it was just too much. I couldn't process the whole day. That was just too much. And in that season, I developed a mantra that helped. In those days when mentally and physically I was stuck on the couch, I would often say, just take one step. Don't focus on a day. Don't even focus on an hour. Just do one thing right. And that one step turned into this sticky note that I'm sharing for those of you who are maybe listening to this on audio only. I have a 3M sticky note that sits on my monitor, and it's a reminder to me to just take one successful step at a time. And many of those days don't feel like that, 20 days in a row anymore. But on occasion, I have those days, and we all have those days. And it's a reminder to just work in that moment to try your best at stacking those successful steps. And slowly, right? It's not going to happen overnight, but slowly that mindset will help you to get up out of that valley moment.
Love it. And Stephen, Masha, and Brian and I often say this, but what is the next right step? So it's a little bit different. I like yours. I like the successful step, but we've said that many times when we don't know, because we're all newer in business and we're recovering from burnout. Brian and I are now 2 years out, and Masha's about a year out from kind of that burnout crisis. But there's days when it's like, oh my goodness, there's so much going on. It's so overwhelming. Okay, what is the next right step? Let's just do that. And sometimes you're right, that gets you through, and then one step at a time.
So
Yes.
if I
That
go ahead, Mark.
So that right next step, even though it could feel mentally it's the right next step. For example, if we're couching it and binge watching Netflix, it's a season for us, right? Because we get through a season of series and then it comes to an end. Don't start the next one. Reflect and see if you're ready to leap out of that burnout stage. It is a coping method when your body is in so much stress and distress, even though it's not the healthiest method, but it is preventing a different type of crisis. So allowing yourselves rest, maybe it's not binge watch Netflix, maybe it's just sleeping in on weekends or through the weekends if you have to, and doing the next right thing. If you are in burnout, as I've learned, you cannot make that decision on your own per se. You may need help with a therapist. During this year of recovery from physical burnout, when I had my health completely went in a similar direction as yours, I couldn't move, I couldn't do anything. My cognitive function was very low. I was in a very, very dark place. And I had those moments where I felt like I'm just going to leap out of it. I'm just going to go hit the gym. I'm going to be fine. But I crashed on the way there. In my recent experience, a year after health crisis of burnout, I found myself doing intense yoga, hot yoga. I felt great. The next day, I felt okay. And after that, I crashed. It wasn't the right type of exercise for me at that particular moment. So, ungrounded myself. I was grounded again by my doctor saying that is not the right type of exercise for you. It did not take you a day to fall into burnout, it took years. It's going to take some time to erupt out of burnout. You have to do one successful step at the time, not a leap. If you do a leap, you're going to crash just as fast. That is a reminder to myself and our listeners. If you're super motivated to get out and get remotivated, pace yourself.
Ooh, you just spoke to my last 6 months in a way that is such a parallel. So I talked to you about a burnout experience I had in November 22, December of 22. I was like, you know what? I'm gonna start working out. And from December to June of last year, was lifting weights 3 times a week. Thought I was doing good. Wasn't moving the weight at all. And I wasn't treating myself right in terms of diet and sleep. And July of last year, walked into an annual physical and my blood pressure was through the roof. And I couldn't figure out what was going on, but it freaked me out. I mean, my BP, and then put me on a med to see if it would adjust. 2 weeks later, I ended up in an urgent care with back pains. And my blood pressure was 170 over 100 and something. And with now me being on a BP med for 2+ weeks. And the very next day, while I knew this was going to take time because they were like, you need to go see a cardiologist and this other person and that other person. And the very next day, the very last day of July of last year, got up that morning, put my kids on a bus at 7 a.m. and I went walking. And I started intermittent fasting that day. Never lifted another weight. In the space of 3 months, Masha, I lost 30 pounds. I got myself and it turned out it was all work stress. My heart was fine, thank God. But in that season, one of these old school motivational guys that I love to listen to, and I binged on his podcast content, Jim Rohn. Listen to Jim Rohn in my ear saying, you just need to treat the next 90 days different than the last 90 days. And so we're talking about one successful step, but it was like, how could you stack this next 90 days different than the last 90 days? How can you stack a different set of successful steps to get to an outcome you haven't been able to see in the last 6 months? And it was this mindset towards, hey, clearly whatever I was doing didn't get me to the right result with this BP reading, with my weight. And shifted to intermittent fasting, shifted what I was putting in my body, shifted to walking 5 to 7 miles a day, and watched the struggle I had the prior 6 months. Could not shed 10 pounds in 7 months. Watched almost 35 pounds fall off in 90 days. Just with that pivot.
Incredible, Stephen. It's keep coming back to the same verse, and you can apply it in any direction and sidewise. The spirit is willing and the flesh is weak. So
Yes.
when you are in burnout, your spirit is there, you want to get out of it, but your flesh cannot physically make an inch of a move. And then similarly, when you are on the upswing and you're doing well, the spirit is willing to keep going and the flesh is there, but then suddenly you realize they're not aligned. So having those conversations with yourself and your accountability buddy is really important and a key to success. So I applaud you for that. Something I could also relate to. I was on a new diet plan from day one when I met my doctor, who literally spoke my soul language and saw everything that was happening and everything that I was doing wrong and held me accountable to it. And when she put me on that diet, it was very extreme routine. Over a year later, I started to see pounds shed. As a matter of fact, during that year, I was actually gaining weight
Yeah.
on that diet. And it was due to my body still being in distress. And I had to start training it to go into the right food, right routine, right sleep cycle, resetting the circadian cycle. And once I was there and I could manage my stress, get off all of the magic pills that's supposed to make your feelings go away and treat that symptom, but not the root of the problem.
Yeah.
Once you shed into those things and walk into your new reality, you really begin to adjust. And once that adjustment is made and your body and your spirit literally sync, that's when I started seeing those results as well.
Awesome.
And did you have a question?
Um, yes, I've just been thinking about it. I mean, so you've mentioned at least 2, maybe 3 different places where you started reaching burnout to a crisis level. Have you started recognizing when those levels get to there without assistance, without somebody beating on your door?
That is a great question, Brian. And one of the benefits of therapy is that it helps you with awareness of what's happening in those moments. In October 2020, of course, we're in the heart of COVID. We moved my dad to stateside, and he's with my sister in Tampa. I didn't want to get on a plane. So I drove 15 hours down to Tampa, and I'm on a drive back home. And some of those creditors that were in Jamaica were like, hey, sending me emails. Hey, business is winding up. We need our money. I didn't realize that was a trigger moment. So I was having these panic attacks. I didn't know what they were. So I remember driving back. The first real series of panic attacks I was having was on this 15-hour drive home, and an hour and a half in, I'm pulling over on the side of the road. I left like super early in the morning. It's like 5:30 in the morning. And I'm thinking I'm having a heart attack on the side of the highway. And I'm praying and I'm turning up the music and I'm driving, and several points in that drive up, I was having these moments. And stubborn, I'm just kind of suppressing it, get home and sharing it with Kristen. She's like, honey, you're having a panic attack. And started talking with my therapist about it. This is the beauty of therapy. A lot of times you think, oh, you don't have a bunch of stuff you're crying about, or, like people just have perceptions of what therapy is about. Like I stepped into therapy and I still do. And I'll explain some of these life moments, these things that are happening that I can't put a definition to, but my therapist can. And I'll never forget her explaining, Stephen, you're experiencing anxiety. And what that means is you're projecting a potential future what if scenario into your present moment. And often is the case, we project the worst possible what if scenario into our present moment. And that's exactly what I was doing, Brian. I was projecting the worst possible scenario with these creditors. And if you recall, at the very beginning of this discussion, I shared the experience I had in 2008 and promising me to myself to never owe anyone again. Well, I didn't owe anyone again, but here comes debts knocking at my door. And these are the subconscious things that our mind never lets go of, right? And they create this anxiety and a panic attack, right? And so it helped me through therapy to be able to acknowledge these things for what they are. And then also to be equipped with different tools. Not every tool that my therapist has recommended have worked for me or even like feel normal or natural. But there are some things that do. And so one of them is walking, right? Walking, and as fluffy as it might sound to some people, going outside and putting, being a tree hugger, putting my hand on a tree, putting my hand outside in the present moment helps remove my anxiety. Why? Because again, anxiety is you projecting a future what if scenario. But if you're in the present moment mentally, the present and anxiety can't coexist. And so getting outside in nature and being in the present moment first thing in the morning has been a tool. Whenever I feel that anxiety coming on, it's been one of those tools to help me not remove it, but level set, and step into many of these days in a much better place than just jumping in and turning on the laptop and dealing with the work stress and pushing yourself into that burnout phase. So it's helped quite a bit to be able to identify it. I can almost feel it coming on a mile away, and I feel it. I know what it is, and I'm able in that season to be able to start addressing it even before talking to a therapist or talking to my wife or talking to my accountability buddy. And there are many seasons where I'm a therapist on a vacation or dealing with life, and it didn't have the cadenced check-ins, and I was able to navigate those pretty well because of
Awesome.
that.
Stephen, we're probably all wanting to jump in and ask you questions at this point, but I'm going to jump in first. So first of all, I am also team walk. I love going for walks in nature. Yeah, Brian's like, ugh. I drag him too when I can. But you mentioned several things, and we talk about different coping skills. We've chosen to go with the model of emotion focused and problem focused, and something we call supportive. And supportive, what we mean is the way you eat, the exercise you get, the amount of sleep and rest you get. And I heard that you do a lot of walking, but it's also combined with emotion focused, which is being in the moment, being present, checking in with yourself. And I find that I do the same thing when I'm on walks. So Brian and I are full-time RVers. We have 2 dogs. They need to be walked at least 3 times a day. So like you, my goal is, okay, I don't do 7 miles, I'll just admit it, but 3 to 4 miles is what I want to get. And I find that when I'm out in nature with my dogs walking, I'm breathing, I'm meditating, I'm praying, I'm checking in with myself, all of those things.
Yes.
So that to me has been one of the most healing coping methods. And nature itself, it's like you just go out there, and you're right, it helps you, gives you a different perspective. At least that's my experience. It sounds like you have that same thing where when you look up and see the sky and see all of creation,
Yes.
it resets your mind.
100%, all of those things. And I'm on that borderline of the country. So my walking path often takes me kind of out on the edge of the woods, and I'm able to see all of that beautiful creation of God and be able to do all the things you just touched on: the parade, the breathing, the meditation. And sometimes there are times where I plug in a motivational podcast, and there are other times where the devices are all off and I'm just one with my thoughts.
I think there is actually some science behind this too. So we talked about the mental, emotional help coping by being outside in the nature, and there is a physical aspect to it too. When we come in contact with earth, with trees, and tree huggers, right? There's actually physical polarity changes that happens in our body, and we discharge all of that into the earth. So we have mental benefits and physical benefits. And I'm definitely a tree hugger as well. But what I also do, even in this weather and there's no snow in my front yard, I will take my shoes off and I go
barefoot.
stand for 5-6 seconds barefoot on my grass, and I can feel that instant relief. It's incredible. So science does support it.
Yeah. There's good research about that.
Grounding.
Yeah.
Yes. Brian, we're going to make you take your shoes off and go outside at some point.
Well,
Just have to
I
go
don't
along
have
with
any
it.
problems going outside, but Stephen, I wanted to change the story up on Michelle a little bit. It's not so much she's walking the dogs 3 times a day, it's the dogs walking her.
That is true.
100%. I
I
have the
witnessed
same
it.
with her too. So we live in a townhome, so I don't have a fenced yard. I have to walk them. And my wife is now back in office several days a week, and the dogs 3-4 times a day. They'll pull me out.
Yeah, and
Tell you what, when we change that sentence around, I let my dog walk me, I'm becoming more flexible to going outside and letting her walk me because I'm too busy, right?
Yeah.
Who has the time to live in the now? We have way too much to do. If I live in the now, that means I'm lazy and I can be productive, right? That's a self-talk that we've adopted over the years, but it is a false narrative we need to shed. Sorry,
Oh,
Brian, I interrupted.
Masha,
No.
okay, Brian, I'm going to let you go in just a second, I promise. But you just said something, and Stephen, I heard you say it, mindset. I heard you say mindset several times, and that's something that all of us have realized as well, is that our mindset has to change. So that's one thing I did want to ask you back about is what were your mindset changes? And then, Brian, I promise I'll be quiet and let you go.
That's such a timely. And I'm happy you caught that. I didn't realize I've said it several times, but I had that conversation just a week ago with my dad. I saw him a week and a half ago in Florida. He's not as active right now as he needs to be. And I had to share that very bit. Look, you have to have a particular mindset that you want to do this for you. I can support you. We can support each other. But at the end of the day, you have to want this for you. So the listener listening in, if you are watching us right now, you can listen to this podcast 100 times, but until you are ready to make a commitment to yourself and shift your mindset to doing the things you need to do. Yes, it is hard. Maybe my dad is saying, hey, Stephen, my back is hurting me. Well, you haven't walked and you've gained a lot of weight. So your back is going to hurt you a little bit. Am I asking you to walk 7 miles a day? No. When I started walking, I couldn't do 7 miles a day. I could get a mile in before I was feeling the back pain and my knees hurt and my thighs, So it took time, but you have to just put yourself in the mindset that I'm going to begin. Dawn is going to be better than perfect, right? I'm not seeking perfection. I'm just looking to better myself each day, each step. And that is where that mindset piece comes in. You have to want that for you and step beyond the excuses of, well, I can't, because you can, maybe not to where you want to be. I had a vision for where I wanted to be in 90 days. Doesn't mean day one turned out that way, but instead of saying one day I'm going to, on July 31st of last year, I said, this is going to be day one of that change.
It is about making progress and doing that one successful step at a time in
Yes.
the right direction. Well said, Stephen.
Yeah, it goes along with one of our favorite people we like to listen to, Earl Nightingale with The Strangest Secret. I don't know if you've ever listened to him, but his 30-day challenge. I mean, that's the type of mindset that will help you get there, is to
Can you see this?
yes.
Oh,
Oh,
beautiful.
yes.
So
My father-in-law, sorry, Brian, I have to show this to you.
okay.
My father-in-law is, he's a big addict to Earl Nightingale and Zig Ziglar. And he's like, Stephen, I'm throwing out all these things from the 80s. And he brought this over with like cassette tapes of Earl
Oh, good.
Nightingale. And I totally went online and bought like a cassette player. And I love Earl Nightingale, everything that he puts out. I have playlists of him on YouTube. So yeah, sorry, you just brought
One
that
No,
up
second.
to
that's
mind.
For
that's good.
Gen Zers and millennials, tape recorders are those tape things you put in. It's kind of like music on demand. You can actually fast forward and rewind. It's music or speeches or whatever,
That's
but
it.
it's
All right,
media.
back on topic.
So,
So the
go,
strangest
Brian.
secret with Earl Nightingale, he goes in. He's talking about positivity and how you have to change your mindset into a positive way. And he gives a 30-day challenge, which is similar to what Stephen was saying with his 90-day mindset. And if any time in that 30 days that mindset shifts, you have to start over and restart those 30 days until you can hit those 30 days without having a mindset shift. And so that's difficult to do. I haven't even tried that. I'll be honest, I haven't tried it because it is difficult to do. But finding nature is one of those things that I think everybody gets a little bit of stress relief and calm, and it helps bring down those stresses. And walking's not for everybody. I used to say it's a four-letter word. I'm trying to get out of that idea. But just driving in nature or just finding a place that's quiet and you can hear nature's sound and sitting in it, like Masha was saying, barefoot on the grass, those work just as well if the physical activity side of it doesn't work for you. Not saying you shouldn't do physical activity, but you have to find the right mindset and the right enjoyment to help you get out of those stressful situations too, as supportive.
Well, sometimes, and here's a tip for those of you that maybe share brands till walking isn't your cup of tea, right? I sometimes still get anxious when I have to check my blood pressure. Right? It's just and it's been level. You know, I'm seeing the 120s over 80s now, but every time I go to sit and do it, I close my eyes. I'll do a bit of breathing before I hit start. And something I was reading actually had me attempt this just maybe a month ago, and I've been having fun with it. I'll close my eyes and look, the same thoughts that consume us and create anxiety on the what if scenarios that are negative, you can still close your eyes and imagine the craziest things that aren't negative. So I have a 9-pound palm mix dog, and I could close my eyes and imagine if she were 9 feet tall and
Yes.
purple. And, her bark would be like, the sound of whatever, right? And I could come up with the craziest thought that would have me close my eyes, laugh about it, right? And take that down several notches, right? So that doesn't require me necessarily being outside or in any type of movement, but it could shift, it could almost shock that, negative thought and shift things. Another thing that I do sometimes is I'll lay on my back, close my eyes, I'll hold one palm out, and I'll just trace my fingers, taking deep breaths. And there's touch, there's feeling, right? There's a lot of things happening. There's breathing. And by the time you do that, a couple times back and forth, you don't realize how much you've taken things down. So those are a couple tools that work for me that you might try if you just want to be able to kind of shift your mindset, if you find yourself anxious in the moment, to shift things.
Well said, Stephen. One thing that I recall from my therapy sessions is it's oversimplifying, but first you have to recognize where you're at before you can successfully deal with those coping strategies. But what is still resonating with me, and I remember it every time I feel off, I do a self-assessment. Am I living in the present? No. Well, where am I? Am I in the past? That's depression. Am I in the future? Imagining those worst case scenarios. Well, that's anxiety. So that differentiator, of course, it's triggering same area of your brain with a little different outcome. You have anxiety, paranoia, because you're imagining that conversation you're never going to have. And assessing whether it's the best case scenario or worst case scenario, or reality is it's going to fall somewhere right in the middle. So self-check-in is very important. And then dealing with those strategies in your Rekindle kit will help you erupt out of those.
I love that.
All
I
right,
love that.
so
I
Stephen, we have a. Oh, go ahead. Continue.
I'd never, Marsha, I love this. I wrote that down just now. I'd never really thought of the past being depression. If you know, I know the future being anxiety, but that's a good one.
Likewise, it takes to hear it from somebody
Yeah.
to relate. Oh, I'm replaying a conversation I should have had that never happened. Why? Like, what good is it doing? That person's gone. I'm not going to have that conversation. The only person suffering is me because I'm reliving the same chaos conversation that shouldn't happen to begin with. So I have a choice to walk away from it in the past, or walk away from that situation and conversation in the present. I'm talking to myself and I'm stressing myself out. No, done. Keep going.
You have time for one more share?
Yeah, I was just gonna say so we have a saying on this show, and it comes from a movie. Brian can tell you what it is, but we talk about landing the plane. So we are on our final approach here because we know we all have to get back to our regular lives. But my question for you, Stephen, is there any additional advice, tips that you would give to someone? That's question one, and then second question is, what are you passionate about right now? And what's going on in your life?
Yeah. One last tip. It centers on focus, energy, and time. Where are you placing your focus, your energy, and your time? Everyone can't get the same level of your focus, your energy, and your time. It ties into this burnout piece. Often is the case, we're trying to give everybody the same level of focus, energy, and time. So I want you guys to think of a dartboard, think of a bullseye, right? It's usually the smallest part of that board. Who is in your bullseye? Can't be everybody. And it should be priority given to the people and the things that are most important to you. And each layout gets less focus, less energy, less time. And here's the key piece. Not everybody belongs on your dartboard. I'm gonna let you sit with that. So you need to think about who gets the most of your focus, your energy, and your time in that bullseye. For me, that's God. That's my wife. That's my kids. That's it. Out from there is my parents and my job, right? And you work your way out. I found myself at one place where I was giving people that bullseye energy, focus, and time, and that was stressing me out. And I had that talk with my therapist, and she shared this concept and actually put it in a visual on Canva and did that exercise and created a visual of, hey, these are the people who are on your dartboard. And mentally now, things come up at work, that one person that sets you off, that I would want to give all my energy and focus to and win that fight. And it took me to a place where I'm like, Stephen, that person isn't even on your dartboard. And it shifted everything at that point. So these instances that will happen inside and outside of work, in my family, with, aunties who want to get in the way of what I'm doing caretaking wise, right? Like, you know what? They don't deserve that focus, that energy, and that time. So that's my tip for you as we wrap up. And the thing that I'm passionate about right now is helping working professionals pivot in a season that we're on the front side of AI changing everything in the coming 3 to 5 years. And I feel it. I feel like God's planted the talent and the knowledge and the experience in me to help people begin to develop their own personal brand, their own alternate offerings against their experience and their wisdom to create those income streams and position for, God forbid, you being laid off and having to shift, right? So I feel a calling on me to help people, especially working professionals in our corporate environment, start to position for this oncoming shift in culture and in our society to prepare for that. So that's a little bit fluffy, but that's the big picture umbrella of, what I'm doing, and I'm helping people build their brand. And you touched on me helping you through your LinkedIn and a LinkedIn challenge I did, and I'm a marketer at the core. So it's helping individuals, with their marketing and their branding.
But
Amazing.
Stephen,
And yeah.
thank you for that. One thing I wanted to revisit is the bullseye really quick. And it's important what you said is keeping that focus where it belongs. So what does it mean for our listeners? It means if you don't know how to say no, you need to master it and know that it's okay to say no to situations and stresses that don't belong in your life. You welcome them in by saying yes when you should have said no. Practicing it is a bit weird. I started saying no to a lot of people, and suddenly they're shocked and taken back. What do you mean you're saying no? Well, right now, what I'm going through, what's in my life that is out of scope, and I'm not open to welcoming that stress that doesn't belong in my bucket. Because oftentimes the way we live our lives, one more drop in the bucket and it will tip over, right? We got to keep that equilibrium and that balance in our lives. And I did not think about the bullseye. I love it. I'm going to print one out and I'm going to define it, what it looks for me. So when I'm tempted to put myself in a situation I shouldn't be in, I will look at it and I'll look in a mirror and ask myself the question, do I have the capacity for that? Does it belong here? Will it sacrifice anything else if I bring it in on my bullseye board? So thank you for that visual. I will take that.
Here's the
with me.
visual for you. Focus, 5 letters. The definition of it: follow one course until success.
Love it.
Wow.
I love it.
Beautiful.
Okay, Stephen, we might be stealing those. All right. Well, we're gonna wrap up, and I do want to make sure that people know where they can find you, Stephen. So, you are at I am Stephen A. Hart on all social platforms, and you are StephenAHart.com. We will put that in the show notes, and I'll put the link to your LinkedIn profile. I do highly encourage anyone who is trying to optimize their LinkedIn profile to take your course. I know at some point here you're going to offer it again, which is a 5-day challenge for your LinkedIn profile. So we will put all that information so they can find you below. Again, thank you so much, Stephen. We have so enjoyed talking with you and learning with you. I feel like you gave us all kinds of great tips that the three of us can apply as well as our listeners. So we're going to wrap up today. And, as always, if you as a listener found this information helpful, please help us. Our goal is to reach 1 million hearts. So if you found this helpful, please subscribe and follow us. And we will be back next week as we talk to a nurse practitioner who has spent years working with caregivers and patients who are in that time of life where they need caregivers. So she's going to help us understand a little bit more about what caregivers go through and give us some practical tips to help with that. So join us next week. And again, thank you so much, Stephen. I hope you have a blessed day, and I hope all of our listeners have a blessed day as well. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.